Welcome to another session of INF154. So in this session, we are going to focus on methods or functions as they call them in other programming languages. So in part 1, we are going to focus on user-defined methods. These are methods that you create for yourself. Then in the second part, we are going to focus on predefined methods, which are methods that were created for you. So these include strings, like string methods, those split, substring, like the square root, and so on. So what is a method? So a method is a group, or you can say it's a sequence of instructions that perform a specific task. So it's just a group or sequence of instructions that perform a specific task. Or in simple terms, you can say a method is a code that perform a specific task. So methods can receive something, so it's not a must. Notice that this is not must. So they can receive something. Then methods can return something. So again, they can. It's not a must for them to return something. So a simple example, we are going to consider like a simple machine that receives like potato, then it receives the oil. Then after receiving these two, we call these parameters. So whatever the method receives, we call it a parameter. So this machine receives like potatoes, then it receives like some oil. Then it's going to perform some operations, or it's going to do something with those parameters. So in this case, it's going to peel the potatoes, then it's gonna cut those potatoes, then it's gonna fry them, then at the end it's going to return chips, or you can say fries. So that's the result. So we have the parameters. So the method receives something, then after receiving something, it's going to perform a specific task, or it's going to perform some operation on that specific input, then it's going to return the result. So that's the general idea, or that's a simple example. So you have inputs, then you have the process, then you have the result. So it sort of like follows the IPO, but not directly. But you receive something, then you have a box. That box is your process. Then you have to return the result from that specific process. So let's recap in maths. I'm sure most of you did mathematics, so this is not something new. So in mathematics, you first define a function, so you have to know what the function does. For example, let's consider the following function. So f of x equals to x squared plus 2. So given this definition, this function definition, we can use this function to calculate like certain values. So when we say f of 2, we are going to substitute 2, then we are going to add 4, then we get 8. That's simple maths. Then f of 3, wherever we see x, we just put 3. So it's going to be 3 squared plus 4, which is 13. Then if you go to 2D or third dimension, for those of you, I don't think first years are doing like 3 dimensions yet, but in 3D you can have f of xy. So you can say f of xy equals to xy. Again, you define your function. Then after defining the function, you have to use that specific function. So you can calculate f of 2, 3. So where I see x, I substitute 2. So I'm going to have 2. Then where I see y, I'm going to substitute 3. So it's going to be 5. F of 4, 6. Again, where I see x, I substitute 4. Where I see y, I substitute 6. Then I'm going to get 10. Then we can extend this to 4 dimensions, which is not visually like the physical representation of 4 dimension. It's hard. Normally we just imagine 4D as like a representation of a 3D object, like at a specific time. So, but we are not here to do mathematics. So f of x, y, z, it receives three parameters, or you can say values. Then here we are defining the function. Then we can call the function. This is called, but we will get to calling the function. Then we can, where we see x, we just put 1. Where we see y, we put 2. Where we see z, we put 3. Then we are just going to substitute those. Then we are going to get the result. So what do we observe about these functions? These functions, they can receive like a certain number of values. This one receives 1 value, this one receives 2 values, this one receives 3 values. But at the end, how many values do they return? They only return 1. So here we receive 2 values, but at the end we only return 1 value. Even this one, we only return 1 value. Even this one, we only return 1 value. So now we are done with the basic mathematics. This was the motivation behind functions. Now we can get into functions, like how do we create methods. You will hear me using functions, but it's just the same. But for you guys, you have to like call them methods, but there's no difference between functions and methods. So what's the general syntax of a function? So to create a function, you have to put this access modifier, or you can say access specifier. Then you have to put the return type. Then you have to put the name of the function. Then you have to put parameters inside these brackets. Then you have to open those curly brackets the way you were doing with loops or with if statements. Then you put the code inside. So let's analyze this specific syntax. What's the meaning of each? So we are going to start with the access modifier. So the access modifier refers to the scope of accessibility of the method. So for INF154, you just use public when you are creating your methods. You don't care about this too much. But next semester on INF164, you are going to go into depth when it comes to this access specifier. Then after the access specifier, which is always public for you guys, but notice that on these like forms, if I double click on a form, you are going to get private, because by default these like event handler methods, they are just private. So yeah, just notice that. Then I'm going to just continue that. Then the other thing is the return type. So what's the return type? So the return type refers to the type of data, or the data type that a method returns. So it can return a string, it can return a double, it can return a character, it can return an integer, and so on. And it can return void. Void means it returns nothing. So we will get to this in detail. Just know the syntax for now. So this is the type of data that your method returns. Then we have the name of the method. Name refers to the name of the method. It can be anything. That's the name you give to your method. Then we have the parameters. So parameters, these are values that your method receives to perform a task. We saw from that example of like a machine, you receive like values, or the values that are needed to produce the specific output. Like even this one, like you receive X, then you perform some calculations, then you return the result. This one, you receive X and Y, perform some calculation and return the result. This one, F, X, Y, Z, perform some calculations and return the result. So now we can move to an example. So create a method that receive 2 integers. So the method must receive 2 integers and returns the sum. So how can we do this? First, we have to identify what's the access specifier for you guys is always public. Then we have to identify the return type, the type of data your method returns. Since we are calculating the sum of two integers, the result will just be an integer. So the return type of the method will be what? Will be an integer. Then you have to specify the name of your method. So in this case, I just named it sum because it calculates the sum. You can name it anything. And returns LO, it receives. You have to identify what does your method receive. What do you need to perform like the necessary operation. To calculate the sum, we need two numbers. So you put the data type int, then you put the name of the variable. So this can be anything. Then you say int, then you put the name of the variable, which is b, inside these brackets. Then after that, you can declare like some variable to store the sum. This is straightforward. We've been doing this. So int result equals to a plus b. Then you say after you performed, how do we return that result? You say return. So this is the return statement. Then you put the result. Then you just close. That's how you create your own method. So we are going to analyze this in detail. So let's create a code in Visual Studio. So let's say we want the code. For example, I'm going to say I'm gonna create a form. Maybe it has two numeric up downs. So let me say numeric up down, then I press enter, then it must have like some labels, then it must have some button like that. So let's see how this works. So I'm gonna put this button here, then I'm gonna put this label for the numeric up down, then I'm going to copy this, then I'm gonna paste it. Did I copy? No, I didn't. So I'm gonna copy this, copy, then I'm gonna paste it here so I can move it here. So I'm just going to name this x, for example, x. Oh, this is the name. Let me leave it as label 1. So I'm gonna put the text as x. So for example, x, then I'm gonna put the other as y. So y. Then I'm gonna put the text of the button as calculate, or I'm going to say sum. Then I can name the button and stuff. So I'm going to name this btn sum. So this is gonna be btm sum. Then this is gonna be nudx, nudx, then nudy. So nudy like that. So I'm done with the form design. I want to create a method. So to create a method, you go to your form, to the code, to the CS code. Then you are going to create a method at the same level as these other methods. You see, this is a method on its own because we see private, return type, name, then parameters, but we don't care about this. This is just a method. Even this one is a method. Public, it doesn't have, this one you will do it next semester. This is a constructor method, but you don't care about it for now. So we are going to create our sum method. We said our sum method must do what? It must return. So we have to say public, then the return type, we said it returns the sum of two integers. So it's gonna be int, then the name of the method, I'm going to say sum. You can put small letters, capital letters, it doesn't matter, but I guess they normally need capital letters for methods, but it doesn't matter that much. Then it receives two numbers, int a and what? And int b. Then it's gonna calculate the sum. So let me say int result, the way we did it, equals to a plus b, like that. Then after that, you do what? You return that result. Or alternatively, you could have just said return a plus b, like this. But for now, we don't care that much. So this is the method. You created the method. You successfully created the method. Notice that I didn't define this method inside another method. I defined it outside. So you are done creating the method. Creating the method tells the compiler that you must create and save this method in memory. Then later I might use this method. So that's the meaning. So we created the method, but the method doesn't just magically perform like a task. So let's say when we click this button, we want our code to calculate the sum. So we can do the IPO, store this in a variable, store this in a variable. So we are going to say int x, then int y. So here we are declaring our variables. Declaring variables. Then to calculate the sum, we need maybe a sum variable. Then we get the inputs from the user. So maybe x equals to, where do we get x from? A numeric up down. So I'm going to say nud x dot value. Then, but this is a decimal, this is an integer, so I have to convert to what? To int 32. So I'm going to convert this to int 32, like that. Then I'm gonna say y again, the same process. We get y from a numeric up down, so convert to int 32, like that. Then now how do I calculate the sum using the method that we created? So how do we do that? We are going to go back and check. Okay, the first question will be, wait, a and b are not initialized. Isn't that an error when I say result equals to, why am I not getting an error for saying result equals to a plus b, even though I didn't initialize a and I didn't initialize b, or I didn't initialize a to something and I didn't like assign b to something? So this is not an error, because remember when we defined those functions, every time we were using those functions, we were like putting values. Then those values will be mapped with like x and y, like that. So every time we just put values, f of 2, every time we want to calculate like a function of something, we are going to pass those values. Then we will see how it works like in detail. Now it doesn't make that much sense, but it will make sense soon. So because we are not getting an error, because to use the method you have to pass values. So to use the sum method, we have to pass values inside this method. So we cannot use this method without passing the values. So how do we call a method? So to call a method, you are going to use a function call, or you can say a method call. So a method call is a code that invokes a method to perform its task. So without calling a method cannot do anything. Like the sum, if we consider the sum method, we just created the method, but we didn't call it. So it's not gonna do anything. So it's just going to be there. So how can we use this specific method? That's the question. So you can say, for example, when you say int, let's say somewhere you say int x equals to, how do we call the method? We put the name of the method, then we pass values, like that. So we have 10 and we have this 20. So let's see how this process works. So it's gonna call this method with 10 and 20. So it's gonna, here we are passing 10 and 20. So this 10 is going to be mapped with what? With A. So A is going to be assigned 10. So this A will be assigned what? It's going to be assigned 10, the 10 that we passed. Then the B is going to be assigned what? It's going to be assigned 20. So the 20 that we are passing on our method. Then after that, we perform the normal execution. So we are going to define result, which is A plus B. But what's the value of A? The value of A was 10 and the value of B was what? Was 20. So it's gonna say 10 plus 20, which is 30. So result is going to store 30. Then after storing 30, it's gonna return what? It's gonna return the result, which is 30. So this result will be returned back to the line of code that called the method. So at the end, this is just 30. So at the end, the whole thing is just 30. So this X will store what? Will store 30. So that's the idea. So notice that the first thing, when we are calling the method, we have to pass values. Then after passing the values, your code will go away from this specific line of code. And it's going to go where? It's going to go to your method. So it's going to your method and it's going to map like the values you passed. In this case, it was 20 with A, then 10 with A, then 20 with B. Then after mapping the values, it's going to perform the normal calculations. So result will be A plus B, which is 10 plus 20. Then return the result, which is just 30. Then after returning the value, it's gonna go back to this specific section and put that 30. So that's how it works in detail. So X at the end is just 30, or this sum what it's just gonna be 30, like as easy as that. So now let's consider another example. Let's say somewhere you have int x is equals to 10, y equals to 25. Then we say message box dot show. Then we say x plus y equals to, this is the, like it's a normal string, so this must be displayed the way it is. Then we say sum of, then we say x and y. So how does the program work? So we know that in memory, when you say x equals to 10, this is a variable. It's going to be represented like that. X stores 10, then y stores 25. So when we say sum x, y, it's like we are saying sum of what? Of 10 and sum of what? Of 25. So after doing this, what's going to happen? This 10 will be mapped with what? With A. So with our A, because it's the first value. So A will be 10. Then this 25 will be mapped with what? With B. So B will be 25. Then after that, we perform the normal operation. Result equals to A plus B, which is 10 plus 25. So this is 35. So at the end, this code is gonna return result, which is 35. So like this, it's gonna calculate, then 35, return 35. Then after returning that 35 is going to be put where? On this. So this whole thing at the end is just 35. So that it's going to be x plus y equals to 35. Like that, this will be the final output. So let's see how it works in code. So we defined this method. Now we want to use this method to calculate the sum. So I can say my sum is equals to, now I can call the method, which is sum. So I'm going to call sum, then I'm going to pass what? X and y. So I'm gonna pass x and y. Or alternatively, I could have done this. So this is the alternative code. I could have said sum equals to, then the sum of, where do we get x? X, we get it from the numeric up down, so it's NUDX dot value. Then y, we get it from the numeric up down, NUDY dot value, like this. But this is a decimal, the method receives an integer, so I can say convert to int 32, this the value of x. Then I can say convert to 232, so to int 32 the value of y, like this. So this is the alternative code if I don't want to use the variables, like this. This is also valid. You can just do this, or you can do it step by step. So let's just consider the step-by-step approach. Then let me say message box dot show. Then I can say x, so x plus y is equals to actually x plus, so I just need the plus. Then I'm going to say plus y is equals to, so is equals to the sum of x and y, like this. So let me see, I forgot the plus. So let's try to analyze this code. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna debug here. So I'm going to put a breaking point here to see how it works. So let's execute this. I'm gonna start the code. So this is the form. So we have x, y, then here I can put values, maybe 50, then let me say 40. Then every time I click submit or this sum button, it's gonna execute the code under the event handler. So it's gonna declare x and y in memory. Then this x will store this 10, this 50. Then this y will store what? The 40. Then after that, it's gonna call this sum xy. So we know that this will be sum of what? Of x. What was the value of x? The value of x was 50 and the value of y was 40. Then after calling the method, we are going to like branch, or we are going to branch to that specific method. So in assembly, we call these method like methods subroutines, because we are going to move from this path, then we are going to go to this like path. So in this path, I'm gonna A will be mapped with 50, then B will be mapped with 40. So it's gonna be A is equals to 50, then B equals to 40, like that. Then result will be A plus B, which is 50 plus 40. Then after that, we are going to say, which is let me see, which is 90, like that. Then we are going to return result, which is 90. Then after we are done with the method, immediately when we reach return result, it's gonna return the final value, which is 90. So this whole thing will turn into 90. Then the message box will show, oh, here I was just supposed to say the sum. I could have said it directly, it was fine also. So the result will return the sum. So let me just restart, since I did this. So again, I'm gonna say 50, then 40. So it's gonna be the same process. Then let's see how it works. Then I say sum equals to, then let me see, if I scroll down, you see NUDY is gonna be 40. Then the sum is just the method. NUDY it's 40. Then where is NUDX? Let me just do this. So let me just go up like this. So let me do this. So the breaking point was here. Okay, this was the, like, after this line of code, NUDY was 40. Let me just backtrack. Let me do this, put a breaking point somewhere, because that one is not that clear. Let me put a breaking point here instead. Or here, let me remove these ones. Then I'm gonna execute this again, just for this thing to be clear. Then I'm gonna say 40 like that. Then I'm gonna click sum. So it's gonna stop here to show me what's happening. So NUDX has 40. Then when I step forward, I see that NUDX is 50, actually not 40. So NUDX is 50. Then what did I pass here? Let me restart this thing, because I think I made a mistake. So it's 50, then we have 40 like that. So I click submit. Then so it's going to stop here because I'm debugging. So NUDX it's 50. Then when I step forward, let's see what's going to happen. Then NUDY it's 50. Then X is going to store that 50. Then I step forward, Y will store the 40 like here. Then I step forward again. You see it went to the method and it passed. A is 50, then B is 40. Then let's step forward. It's gonna say result equals to A plus B. Let's step forward. So after that line, result is 90. Then it's gonna return the result, which is 90. So let's step forward. So let's go to that line of code. Let me see. Then it's just going to show the result. So let me go back. So it's just gonna show the result, which is 90, the way I explained. So you can use this debugging thing. You just put the breaking point wherever you want, then you debug it manually. So that's what, like, I wanted to show you how to use the debugger. Now we can go back to the theory. So another example, it's a void method. So a void method does not return anything. So if we go to the code, so if I go to the code here, then you will see that these methods, when you double click on something, they don't have return at the end, because they are void method. You see, this is a void method, so it doesn't have a return. Even this one, it's a void method, it doesn't have a return, and this is not an error. But if you create, like, let's say any method, public void, maybe dummy, whatever, like a dummy method, then I say, like, not void, let's say int, I'm going to get an error because it must return an integer. So I'm gonna get an error. But when I say void, I'm not going to get an error because I'm not expected to return anything. So this is return nothing. A void method doesn't return anything. So that's the idea of a void method. So for example, write a method that receives a student's name and GPA and outputs their details on a message box. Again, we have to identify what does the method returns. In this case, it doesn't return anything. It just outputs or it displays the details of the student. But after that, we say public. Then because it doesn't return anything, I'm gonna say void because it doesn't return anything. Then I'm gonna give it a name. Here they were not specific, so I'm just going to say display. Then what does it receive? So now it receives the student's name, which, so it's a string. We know that name is a string, so we are gonna say data type and we are going to say the variable name. So in this case it's just name. Then we say comma. It also receives the GPA normally it's double, so we are just going to say double, then we just say GPA. Then inside those curly braces, the normal brackets. So this public is our access modifier. This is our return type. This is the name of the method. This is our parameters. Note that when we are creating a method, the parameters must have the data type, then they must have followed by the name. If you have multiple, you separate them with a comma. Then inside, I'm just going to calculate the final output. I'm just going to say string out equals to empty, then out equals to name. Like this is the normal string concatenation. By now you should know this. So name plus name, then plus new line, out plus equals to, then GPA plus GPA. This is just back to the basics. String concatenation. If you forgot, you must refer to the previous videos. I think it was, I don't even remember, but it's introduction to programming on the playlist. But yeah, you know how to do that. By now, I am expecting you guys to know how to do this. Then after I calculated the output, I can just display the output on the message box. Again, let's see how this works when we run our code. Let me just erase these. I just want to see how this works. So I'm just gonna remove this. So how does this work? Let me just do this and do this. Yeah. So calling the method, we want to see how do we call a void method. So this will be in another event handler. This thing, it's gonna be in another event handler. So I'm going to declare a string. Maybe let's say the string has hello, then double, maybe b equals to 56. Then how do we call a void method? So to call a void method, you don't have to assign it anywhere. You cannot use a void method in an expression. You can, yeah, in a mathematical expression, you cannot use a void method. We saw that with that one, we can use it in an expression like plus sum. With the void method, you cannot say plus like the name of the method. That's not possible. Even storing void in some values, it's not possible. So how do you call it then? To call a void method, you just put the name of the method like that. Then you pass the necessary values. So in this case, we are passing A and B. Then you just put a semicolon. As easy as that. Then how does this work? Again, when we call a method, the value of A in memory, it's hello. Then the value of B is what? It's 56. So this A, this is the same as display what? It's the same as display, then hello as a string, then B, it's what? It's 56. Then when we call the method, this hello will be mapped with this name. variable. So the name will store this hello, then the GPA will store this 56, like that. Name has 56, then GPA has 56. Then we are going to execute the code normally because we have the values of name and GPA. So in this case, we are going to start with an empty output. So the output is empty. Then output equals to name plus whatever name. In this case, name it's hello. Then move to the new line. So this is the same as name hello. Then move to the new line. Then next line that we execute is what? It's out plus equals to. Plus equals to means continue where you ended. Then we are going to say GPA. Then what's the value of GPA? GPA is 56. So it's gonna be GPA 56. Again, to create this method, we can just write it here. Public void display. Then I put the string name. Then I put double GPA like that. Then I just say string maybe output equals to empty string. Then I say output equals to, let me see, string out equals to, yeah, out. Let me see, what did I do wrong? String out equals to an empty string. Why am I getting errors? String out equals to empty string. Then, so I don't know why. Let me just say this and see. You see, now I can't struggle with the basics, like it's back from the beginning. Let me say string out. Then why is it giving errors? This is so weird. Let me see. String. Oh, I cannot use out. Out is a keyword that you are going to use in INF164. Like when you say out, it's passed by reference. So that was my mistake. So let me just say output. So out cannot be used because it's a keyword. But you are going to learn about pass by value and pass by reference in next semester. So that was my issue. Then now I can calculate output is equals to name. Let me remove this. Name plus the name of the student plus a new line. So new line, then output, then plus equals to, then here I made a mistake again. Plus equals to, let me do this. So plus equals to GPA. Then I'm going to add the GPA like this. So after this, I just display the result in a message box. So message box.show, then I'm gonna say output like that. So you have to be careful when you are naming your variables or your methods. You cannot use keywords. Like, you have to be careful with that. The name can be anything without the keywords, like the reserved keywords. To check reserved keywords, you can go anywhere on the internet and say C#, like to avoid this reserved words. Then you just go anywhere. You can go to images, anywhere you will get, like, these cannot be used as names of variables or names of methods. like even for C++, C sharp, whatever. So you cannot use void, you cannot use visual, you cannot use true, you cannot use throw, you cannot use these as the names of your methods. So you have to be careful, or the names of your variables. Then let's see how this method works. So to call this method, let me remove this since we are no longer interested in the sum. Then how do we use this method? I can just say display, for example. Then I can say whatever here. Then I can say 10, like that. So every time I click on the submit button, this sum, it's gonna execute the code under the sum event handler method. So it's gonna call display and it's gonna pass this name and this. So it's gonna map this name with this, then this GPA with this, then it's gonna perform the normal calculations, then it's gonna display the result. Notice that it doesn't like output anything. So let me just rerun the code and see. So I say sum, you see, exactly as we executed. So methods are very easy. The challenging thing is that whatever you are putting inside the method is just the normal code that you are used to. So from lecture 1 to 8, that's what you are going to put inside the method. And you have to identify, what do I receive from my method? What do I return on my method? Or what do I get from my method? So notice that these variables, you are defining them inside the methods. This int a is defined inside the method. This int result is defined inside a method, and so on. So what types of variables are these? This a, this b, this result. What type of variables are these? Are these local variables or global variables? Then you can think about this. But to save time, these variables are local variables. They are defined inside a specific method. This a cannot be accessed outside this method. This b cannot be accessed outside this method. This result cannot be accessed outside this method. For example, if I say int maybe sum equals to a plus b, even if I try to type a plus b, it won't allow me. If I look at the error, it's gonna say, let me see. It says name A does not exist in the current context. Name B does not exist in the current context because these are local variables. They are defined within this event handler method. They cannot be used outside of this method, or they don't exist outside of this method. So local variables, those are variables defined within a specific method and cannot be accessed outside that specific method that created them. So those are your local variables. You cannot use these outside of this specific method. Even this output, it doesn't exist in this scope. If I say maybe message box dot show, then I say output, let me say output, it won't work. You see, it doesn't even want to give me that specific output because it doesn't exist in the current scope. So you have to make sure that you don't confuse these local variables. Don't try to use the specific local variables somewhere. A variable that is declared within a specific method is a local variable. Then a variable that is declared globally outside a method, it can be here. Let's say int sum equals to 0. Then if I say sum inside any method equals to a plus b, I mean, let's say 10 plus 20 for simplicity. This is valid because this is a global variable. It doesn't belong to any method. Even if I go here, sum equals to 5 plus 10. This is valid because this is a global variable. Even if I go here, like, it doesn't matter, but you have to be careful when you are dealing with local variables and global variables. Let's see. Let me remove this. Now we can go to another example. So another example will be example 3. So create a method that takes an array and returns the average. So we want a method that takes an array of numbers actually and returns the average. So let's assume that it takes integers. So here they were not specific. So you can assume that it returns what? The average. The average must be a double. So I'm going to say public double for the average because it makes sense to make the average double. Then I'm going to give it a name, which is average. Then I'm gonna say array. It receives an array. So what's of integers? The data type of array of integers is int square brackets. Then we give it a name. Then to calculate the sum, this is the normal code. You see, now we are getting back to the basics. This is the normal code. We say int sum equals to 0. Then we are going to say double average equals to 0. You know how to do this. This is back to the basics. Then you loop through the array from 0 to the end. Then you just move forward. Then you say sum plus equals to a of I. This we know how to do that. Then after you calculate the average equals to, you convert one of these to double to avoid integer division. Then divided by the number of items. This is not new. Then after you calculated the average, you are going to return the average. The difference is that we created our own methods that will calculate the average. So it will return the average. Then we just receive an array. So an example of this method, or how do we apply this specific method? So let's say you have int array somewhere in another event handler. So let's say this array has these items 5, 10, 15, and 20. So I say double result equals to sum, then array. This is valid because the data type of result is what? It's double. The data type of this method, what is this method returning? It's returning a double. So this is valid. I have a double on my left, and on my right I have a double. At the end, this method will just return a double. So the return type, it's very important. So when I call this array, it's like, when I call this method, it's like I'm passing this array. So it's gonna pass this like a copy of that original array. So this is an array of integers, so it's gonna pass a copy of that specific array. Then we know how do we index. We start at 0, 1, 2, 3. Then it's going to map this array with what? With R. So R will contain these specific values. Then executing the code, it's easy. So we start, it says start at 0, then as long as I is less than array.length. In this case, we have 4 items in the array. So we are gonna start with sum initially 0. So the sum is initially 0. Or the result, do I have sum? Okay, sum is 0. Then I will start at 0. Is 0 less than 4? Is 0 less than 4? Yes. Sum plus equals to, this means add whatever is at position 0 to the previous sum. So we have this, or let me execute this anyways on code just to show you how it works. So let's create the method. So it's gonna public, it returns a double, then I'm gonna say average, then it receives an array, so we indicate it by that. Then I can say the array name, then it's double sum equals to 0, then average equals to, yeah, average equals to 0, then I loop through the array, int I equals to 0, from 0 up to the end. Then every iteration I add the current element to the sum. Then after this I calculate the average. So average is equals to sum, like that. Then I have to return the average. So since I declared my sum and average as doubles, there's no need to convert here because I have a double divided by an integer, so it doesn't matter. So how do we use this? Let's say int result equals to let's say average. We are calling the method. Then let's create an array actually first. Int array of integers, numbers, whatever, equals to new. Actually we can just say 5, 10, 15. Then I'm gonna say 20. Then I'm going to pass the array which is numbers, like that. Then let me see. Oh, it returns a double, I forgot. Then I can say message box dot show the average is, then I can say plus, then result. Then I can give it a heading, for example, just to remind you that when you put two parameters, the other one is a heading. So average. So let's see how this program works. So I'm going to put a breaking point here. So I'm gonna put a breaking point here. I can execute it manually, which I can, or I can just use this idea of breaking point. So we want to see what's going to happen. When I click sum, this code will be executed. So an array will be created. Let me see, why doesn't it debug? So I put a breaking point. Let me say start. So when I click sum, so it's gonna go here. So initially my array was null. Then after executing the whole line of code, it's going to store values. So you see my array has 4 numbers. At position 0 I have 5, at position 1 I have 10, at position 2 I have 15, at position 3 I have this 20. So that's how you can debug, like check your array. Then I move to the next line of code. Next line of code, it's gonna call this method, the average, and it's gonna pass the array. So it's gonna make a copy of this array and store it inside this specific array. If we check this R, it's containing like the same values. At position 0 you have the 5, at position 1 you have the 10, position 15 you have the, at position 2 you have 15, position 3 you have that specific 20. Then if I step forward, now we are declaring this number or this sum which is 0. Then I step through average which is 0. Then after executing, where do we go? We are going to the loop. Look at this. I will be what? Will be 0 initially. Then we check. After that, we are going to do what? We check, is 0 less than the length of the array? The length of the array is 4. So that's true. So what's going to happen? We are going to execute the code inside. So the code inside says add array at position 0, because I is 0, to our sum. So we expect our sum to be what? From this array, we are going to add 5 to the sum. So we expect our sum to be 0 plus 5. which is equals to 5. You see, after the execution, our sum is 5. Then we step through again, we increment. You know how to execute a loop. Like I will just skip through this until the loop it's done executing. You know how to do that. So let me go back. Actually, let me go back. No, it won't go back. Actually, so let me wait for it. So let me just go forward. Okay, let me just go to the program. Like at the end, it's just going to calculate the sum of that specific array and just calculate the average. Let me just restart this, just because I skipped too much. Let me just say forward, 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 forward until we are done with the loop. So it's gonna execute the loop, 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 loop until it's done. So now my final sum was 50 after adding the numbers. So I'm going to say 50 divided by r dot length. R dot length is what? It's 4. So it's gonna 50 divided by 4. I think it's 12.5 if I'm not mistaken. Then I just go, then average will be 12.5. Then at the end, it's going to return this 12.5. Then after this, it's gonna go back to the where it ended. So it's gonna go to this average must store that 10.5. Let's see if that's the, result must store 10.5. So you see now the final value of result is 12.5. Then it's gonna display that to the message box if I step through. So it's gonna display that 12.5. So that's how you debug your code action. Or you can just do it yourself on paper. I think it's faster to do it on paper than to do it like with your PC. Okay, then for others, I'll just explain the code. I want like execute it on Visual Studio. So example 4, write the code that receives an array of names and a name. So the code must receive an array of what? Of names. An array of names, it's a string. It's an array of strings. Then and a name is a string. So the array must count how many times the name appears and returns, or the method. Actually the method, not the array, the method. So the method must count how many times the name appears in the array and appears like and returns that specific number of times it appears. So in this case, we are gonna say public. So it returns, it's just counting the number of times a specific like name appears. It must return an integer because we are just counting. Then you give it a name, for example, count. Then you open, it receives a string, an array of names. So this will be your string array. Then it receives a name. So basically, given an array, we want to search for that specific name. Again, this is not new. So we start initially, we will have a counter variable that will count how many times name appears in the array of names. Then looping through the array, it's easy. Start at 0 until the end, move forward by 1. So every time we are every time we are iterating through the array, what are we going to do? We are going to check if the current element in the array is equals to the name we are looking for. If that's the case, we are going to increase the number of occurrences of that specific name by 1 because we found that specific name. Then we are going to return C, or that specific count. So again, execution, let's say we have a string array of names. So you have this AA, BB, CC, DD. then you have string b equals to AA. Now I'm gonna say int result equals to count. First I have to verify that this method returns an integer. Yes, on my left I have an int. This method returns an integer, so this is valid. Then I have to check, does the method receive n? N is a string array. Yes, it does receive a string array. Then does it receive b? So this is a typo. This must be 1b for the name of the variable. So does it receive a string b? Yes, it does receive like one string. So what's going to happen? It's like calling the method, then create a copy of the array. So the original array will be copied the way it is. At position 0 we have AA, at position 1 we have BB, at position 2 we have CC, at position 3 we have AA. Then we are going to pass the value of b. String b, it's what? It's AA. So this was a typo. This is AA. So these values will be mapped with what? This will be mapped with names, and this other one will be mapped with what? This will be mapped with name. Again, after that we just execute this code. Normally we start C at 0, then we just look through the array, we compare this. Is this equals to AA? Yes, we are going to increase C by 1. Then we go to the next one. Is this equals to AA? No. Move forward. Is this equals to AA? No. Move forward. Is this equals to SA? AA? No, we are going to increase C by 1 again. So the final value of C will be 2. Now we reach the end. We are going to return C, which is 2. You can like do it on paper, or you can do it on the debugger. But for me, I'm just going to leave it like this. So this was just another example of how methods works. Then another example, write a method that receives a number n and it generates n random numbers. So it must receive a number n. So it receives an integer and it generates n random numbers and add the numbers in a list box. The method must also return an array of the created random numbers. So the random numbers must range from 0 to 100. So let's try to analyze this. So it returns what? Returns an array of created random numbers. In this case, we are just creating integer random numbers. Again, access modifier is public. It returns an array of integers. So I'm going to say int, then put the square brackets. Then I give it a name, for example, generate. Then it receives what? It receives a number. So it receives an integer. So based on that integer, what do we want to do? We want to create an array having that specific size n. So we are going to create an array. We know how to do that from the previous video. Then to generate random numbers, we need the random number generator, or the random number generator object, which is this. Then again, we have to loop through the array starting from 0 until the end to populate the array. Then every time we iterating, we are going to create a random number between 0 and 10. Did I say 10 here? Yeah, 10. So I'm gonna say 0, 11 because this is exclusive. Then after generating a random number, where am I going to store it? On the current element. Then after that, we are going to say lstn.items.add. So we are adding the generated random number to the list box. Then we are going to return the result. So this one is worth to analyze actually. So let's do it on Visual Studio. So let me remove this breaking point. Let me close this. So I'm gonna stop this. Then I can create another method. So it's public So we said it returns an array of integers, then the name is generate, then I'm gonna pass an integer, so int n. Then based on that integer, the first step is to create an array. Maybe array equals to new, then int n. So we are creating an array of that specific size. Then after that, what do we want to do? We want to, after that, we want, so since we have to create the random numbers, we need the random number generator, like that. Then after this, what do? We iterate through the created array. Notice we have to create the array first, since it was not there to iterate through it. So we have this, I must be less than r dot length, then I plus plus, then I'm gonna every time we are iterating through the array, we are just saying array at I, we are going to generate a random number dot next. Then you can say 0 up to 11. Then we want to add that newly generated random number. So I need a list box from my form. So I'm gonna put a list box here. So list box. So I'm going to put this list box. Then I can say LST numbers, like that. Then I'm gonna go to this, actually to this. Then every time I just add that dot items dot add the current element. Notice I populate first, like the current element with a random number. After that, I'm gonna add that stored number in the list box, like that. Then after I'm done with the process, I'm going to return the array. So let's see the execution of this. So in this, I'm just going to say, okay, let me just say int my array is equals to, so it's an array of integers. So my array is equals to what? Is equals to generate. Then I'm gonna say 5. So this means I want to generate 5 numbers. 5 numbers and store them in the array, random numbers. And at the same time, store them where? On my list box. So let's put a breaking point just to debug. So I'm gonna go to my form design, then I can put a breaking point here. So I'm gonna put it on line 54. Then now I'm gonna execute this. Then again, when I click submit, it's gonna go to this specific line of code. It's gonna say int, it's gonna say array whatever equals to generate. So we are going to process this, the right part first. So generate will call a method. So it will check this. On my left, I have int, like an array of integers. Generate returns what? Generate also returns an array of what? Of integers. So this is a valid assignment. Then 5, yes, it receives an integer. So n will be mapped with this specific 5. So let's see how it works. Let's step forward. So you see this n is mapped with the 5 we passed through the argument. Then let's move to the next line. Next line, it must create an array of size 5 since we have 5 elements. So I'm gonna step through this. Then you see the array, it's an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, and by default they are initialized to what? To zeros, because here we are just, this line of code just creates an array of size n. In this case, n was 5. Then let's see how it works. Then I'm gonna step through then I will start where at 0. Then we have to check, is 0 less than r dot length? R dot length is 5. So this is true. So it must go where? It must go inside the loop. So inside the loop, it's gonna execute r of I. It's gonna see r of 0. It's gonna generate a random number and store it inside that r of 0, or at position 0. Let's see. So I step through. Let's see the random number. So it says the generated random number is 2. So this was the generated random number. The generated random number is 2. Then my array disappeared. Now I cannot keep track of it, but it's fine. So it's gonna generate 2 and store it at position 0 in the array. Then let's see where it moves after this. Then and add that 2 in the list box. So it's gonna add 2. If I go to lst.items, I see that it added like that random number. That let me see. Actually, I cannot see the number. I cannot see the number. Let me see locals. Oh, I can see the array actually. So it generated 2 and added it inside our array. So let's see the next, what's gonna happen. So now my I will be 1. So I will be 1. So I will be incremented to 1. Let me go down. So I is 1. Then after that, I'm going to check, is 1 less than r dot length? R dot length is 5, yes. Again, it's going to execute the code inside the loop. The code inside the loop says generate a random number, store it inside the array. So we'll see it will generate a random number. In this case, the generated number was 5 and it stored at position 1 because I is 1. Then I'm gonna step through. Then I will be increased by 1. Now I is 2 after increasing. So after increasing, I is 2. Then we are going to check, is 2 less than r dot length? R dot length is 5. So yes, 2 is less than 5. Then I'm gonna go inside the loop. Inside the loop, I'm gonna generate a random number between 0 and 11, from 0 to 10 actually, and store it in r at position 2 because I is 2. Then let's see what's gonna happen. So 4 was generated and it's stored at position I, which is 2. Then even the list box, we are adding numbers. We are going to add r at I. It's going to add this 4. Then again, we repeat the process. This process is going to repeat until you are done actually. You see now I it's 5. Is 5 less than 5? No, this means we are not going to enter here. We are going to move, like return the array. So it's going to return array containing these values. Then let me click next. Then after that, it's gonna store, you see my array will be a copy of that created array. So it's gonna be like that. Then now I can go and see on the message box, we have the same thing. So the array is like this, even the list box, it's like that. Then for this video, I'm going to end here. Then on the next video, we are going to continue with like methods until we are fully done with them. So the next video won't be this long. So yeah, I hope you guys understand.